Yeah.
Can you can you
That's me. I
can
did
you
it.
hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. If you're having trouble hearing, you might want to move up and sit a little bit closer to the TV. Is that going to help? It's up to you.
Yeah. It's okay.
All right. Anyway, as I was saying, it's David Jacobowitz, chair of the education program at, I used to be co-chair, but unfortunately we lost our co-chair, Dr. Kranzler. Um, and we have this wonderful new series that we're kicking off today. It'll be on Monday mornings for 4 weeks, focusing on the rise of religious Zionism, pre-state through the current day.
That's better. Thank you.
Oh, very
Did
good.
it switch back?
Right.
Oh, it turned off again.
Oh, no.
No. Are you still speaking, David? I don't hear you.
No, I
No.
stopped.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's why I didn't hear you.
Thank you.
Okay.
How about now? Are we all right?
Good, yeah, good.
Good?
Perfect. Yes, a good
Okay.
program.
So this will be 4 sessions. The dates were in the publicity, and we're very pleased to have with us Rabbi Uri Pilichowski, who's a senior educator with Nefesh B'Nefesh, the Zionist Education Initiative. And without further ado, Rabbi Pilichowski.
Thank you very much, David, and it's a pleasure to be with everybody. I'm actually coming to you from Israel, where I live in Mitzpeh Yericho, my home. Sometimes I'll be coming to you from Yerushalayim, and sometimes from my office, and sometimes from here in Mitzpeh Yericho. And as David said, we are going to cover pre-state religious Zionist leaders, and to go through the topic of different personalities and really understand the different personalities of who made up the religious Zionist leaders. But I felt that in order to truly understand pre-Zionist leaders or pre-state religious Zionist leaders, we have to really come up with a with an understanding of Zionism and an introduction in terms of the controversy of why it was so remarkable, excuse me, that there were people that were against Zionism and within the Torah world against Zionism, which something I'm looking around at the people in the Zoom chat and in the classroom might find a little strange, being the fact that it seems like most people are religious Zionists. This quote that I have behind me, I'm hoping everybody can see it. I'll read it. It says that the Jewish people have a right to self-determination in their historic homeland, the land of Israel. And this is a definition of Zionism that we'll be using for this series. I'm just as a show of hands because if we start taking comments, it'll be a little wild and unruly. But if anybody has any questions, you can throw it in the chat. And if anybody's in the classroom, you just raise your hand and we'll do it that way. But a request if it's questions more than statements and opinions, maybe we'll save that for the end. But how many people recognize this quote from a Zionist scholar? Anybody recognize this quote? Just a show of hands if you recognize the quote. So okay, one person recognizes the quote. Now I do have to say that the themes of this quote you might recognize, but I'll tell you why I don't really. But why I'm very happy that most of the people have their hands down. One of the oddities of Zionism, I consider myself a scholar of Zionism. I've written books about Zionism. I write weekly columns about Zionism, and I teach Zionism to over 10,000 people a year. And one of the most fascinating observations about Zionism is that Zionists never defined Zionism. Theodor Herzl never wrote a definition of Zionism. Chaim Weizmann never did. David Ben-Gurion never wrote a definition of Zionism. So if I would ask you who said this definition and who taught this definition or who wrote this definition, you would all give wonderful guesses, and you'd say, "Oh, maybe it was Golda Meir or maybe Menachem Begin." And the answer would be that it's me. I'm the one that wrote this. And the reason why I had to write this is because there was no definition ever given. And therefore, and that was a very good thing, I think. And therefore, you have to come up with your own definition. But I call this my consensus definition of Zionism. What I mean by that is, if you take 100 Zionists and put them in a room, and not just because they'd probably be Jewish, you'd have 100 different opinions because Zionism was so expansive. If you'd go around and ask Zionists, is Zionism a capitalist system or a socialist system? So the answer is both. It fits both. Is it religious or is it secular? It's both, right? So there's so many different avenues and so many different ways that Zionism can be defined that we have to come up with a definition of Zionism that everybody might think is missing and lacking, but they wouldn't say that it has something in it that they object to. And I really think maybe the only Zionist camp that would object to this is maybe the scholar Ahad Ha'am's camp, who really didn't look at Zionism as something that would be expressed in a physical state, but more in a spiritual realm, and correcting the Jewish people that way. But take Ahad Ha'am out of the picture. This definition of Zionism has four elements to it. Number one is that we're not just a religion. Jews are a people, we're a nation. Number two is that we have rights as a nation. Nations have, according to most people, nations have rights, rights of self-defense, and one of those rights is the right to self-determination. That a nation has a right to self-determination, that we get to determine our own decisions, our own future as a nation. And lastly, that we get to do this in our historic homeland, the land of Israel. So four elements to our definition of Zionism. And as you're looking at this definition now, okay, I'm about to switch screens. So get this, make sure you're familiar with this, you've seen this, you're okay with this, you'll remember it. As we look at it, we have to ask ourselves, is this definition of Zionism consistent with the Torah? That's the question that we're going to be asking ourselves. But before we get to even discussing that question, we have to look at how Zionism came about, what was happening in Zionism. And I'm sure that many of these points of information that I'm going to review with you, you're very familiar with, but it pays to just put into context what we're discussing. Zionism, as you know, is a political movement started about 150, 175 years ago in the mid 1800s. That's not when Herzl started, but Herzl really wasn't, if we're honest with ourselves, the first Zionist. He was just the first effective Zionist. We'll call him that. The first person that really got the ball rolling and got the whole world thinking about the idea of the Jewish return. But if we would look at Abraham Lincoln's writings, we would consider Abraham Lincoln a Zionist. He talked about he was a what's called a restitutionist Christian, which felt that the Christians, these are a type of Christian that believed that the Jewish people should be returned to their land. And Abraham Lincoln predated Theodor Herzl. So Zionism has a rich history that comes before Herzl, but it really kicked off in the mid to late 1800s, with Theodor Herzl starting the political movement of Zionism. Now, what drove Herzl? Herzl, I'm not sure how many people are familiar with the details of his life. Herzl died at 44. He was a very young man when he died, and he died of exhaustion. He died of Today, probably they'd be able to install a pacemaker and keep him alive. But his doctors told him that the pace that he's keeping up is not sustainable. And already in his early 40s, his doctors told him that if he keeps this up, he's going to die. They told him straight out, and he ignored his doctor's orders. Never a good idea. And then they were right, and he died because he was working too hard. But what drove him? And for 1900 years, we were outside of our land. So what was driving Herzl at this point that he felt that he had to risk his bodily health to be able to establish the state of Israel? And Herzl understood that it would take time. Everybody's familiar with the entry in his diary that he wrote in 1897 that Israel's going to the state of Israel will come about in 50 years. He was close. He wasn't 100% correct, but he was 1 year off. But he had this notion that it was going to happen in half a century away, but he still worked very hard. So what was driving him was rising anti-Semitism. And Herzl saw that in Europe, anti-Semitism was rising to levels that he had not seen in his life, nor had he seen recordings of anti-Semitism to this dangerous of an extent. And of course, he could not predict a Holocaust that was unpredictable of a level of persecution and hatred that would be turned into the killing machine of the Germans. But he did understand. He did understand that something bad was coming, and that the only way the Jewish people could protect themselves from that danger was having their own state where they could run to and have refuge and be able to defend themselves if need be. So that was what was driving him, this fear. And unfortunately, his fears were justified because had we had a state of Israel during the Holocaust, so Jews would have had a place to flee. They would have had a place of refuge, and our history would be much different. So Herzl was justified. There were a lot of pogroms that happened during this time period. The most well known, and the reason why it was the most well known, it wasn't because it was the worst of the pogroms. It wasn't the worst sign of anti-Semitism that people had, but it shook fear in people because it spread so fast. Not the actual pogrom, but the news of the pogrom. And it really woke a lot of people up to what was about to happen in their towns and what could happen in their towns. So that was the Kishinev pogrom was something that really scared them, really scared the Jewish world at that time, and that again drove drove the Zionist movement to its next level of intensity. The Kishinev pogroms happened in the early 1900s, so there was already Zionist conferences, and the Zionist world had already been ignited, but not to this level. And now you had the Torah world, and this is what we're going to be focusing on. The Torah world again is not monolithic. It's not that they had one Torah leader that everybody was following, but the Torah world was a world that existed in its own, something that we have trouble relating to because of how global the world is now. I mean, if you think about what's happening right now, just in this space that we're in now, you're talking to somebody or listening to somebody, if you're still paying attention to somebody all the way out in Israel, and you know what happens in Israel a second after it happens. Right when the sirens go off here, or a hostage is released in America, they know about it right away, and that's the spread of information, and you feel connected to the Jewish world wherever you are. Something that happens in Israel, you feel just as connected to as if it happened in southern Florida. And that's not the way the world was 100 years ago. 100 years ago, people lived in a shtetl, and they did not know what was happening around the world. Chaim Weizmann wrote an autobiography, and the first 50 pages of his autobiography, he talks about his childhood in a small village that was 20 kilometers away from any city, and even the city that it was close to would not be what we would consider a city. We'd consider it a tiny town. And they found the news out 2 weeks after it happened. So that's the way the world really was back in the days of early Zionism. So when you had the Torah world, they were in their little shtetl. They did not know what was happening. They weren't even aware of half of world Jewry. As you think about it, they had the Jews in, let's say, a shtetl in Poland were completely unaware of Jews in Yemen. They didn't know they existed, let alone what was happening to them, right? They had, let's say, the Rambam's Igeret Teiman, but they didn't know of these communities that were out in Iraq. Forget about Ethiopia. Forget about that. We didn't. They had no idea about Jews in Ethiopia, and then Jews that went off to America. They basically didn't hear from them again and had no idea what was happening in their lives. So the Torah world, at that same time, as isolated as it was, It was also had just been through what they considered, what the Torah world considered, a very traumatic experience of the Haskalah movement, and it was still within the Haskalah movement. The Haskalah movement had not ended yet, and this had taken a lot of the best and the brightest of their world and had drawn them out of the Torah world, and they considered those people lost to their world, and they considered it tragic that they had lost, and they saw Haskalah as a danger, and it was a danger that had crept up for 100 years previous to the start of Zionism. So the Torah world was really on guard from any outside influence that Torah leaders felt could do more damage by bringing more Jews away from authentic Torah Judaism. That's the context that we have to understand, and see that now when Zionism comes on to the picture and speakers start traveling around Eastern Europe and different villages and different shtetl, and start talking about Zionism and start talking about this return to Eretz Yisrael, and a lot of these speakers, we look at pictures of Herzl and we laugh because he looks like such a religious Jew with his big beard. But Herzl wasn't wearing a kippah. So when Herzl comes into a town and says, "I want to speak about this need that we have to come back to Eretz Yisrael," that was not looked upon as a positive thing in many Jewish towns, because this was a danger. This was just a different form of Haskalah that was going to bring the young Jews away from the Torah world. So with that context in mind, that's how we can go ahead and now enter the discussion of whether or not Zionism was consistent with Torah. Now, I have to say, this is a very uncomfortable way of me teaching, not on Zoom. I teach on Zoom all the time, but without taking questions. I know that David warned me but does anybody have any? I just got to ask. Does anybody have any questions? I'm not going to be able to speak for an hour straight. Okay, but I'm really just going to ask if we can make sure they're questions and not statements. Yeah, I definitely want to hear statements. We'll save statements to the end, but questions now. In the front row, there's a wonderful man in a blue vest, and he had his hand up.
Is your definition of Zionism, does it include Israel?
Yeah, so I did. It did. It had the last component was the historic homeland of the Jewish people, the land of Israel. Yes, yes. So even though there was a time where it was contemplated that maybe we should go somewhere else, I'll tell everybody here a secret. Okay, so this is something that you can say even if everything I'm telling you is boring you. This I can almost promise you didn't know. Okay, you know the Uganda scheme that everybody all go to. So it was Chamberlain's father, the Chamberlain that we know of that appeased Hitler. His father was in charge of the colonies in Britain in the early 1900s. His father's name was Joseph Chamberlain, and he was the colonial secretary of the British. And this is how much land England had and how little they considered of anybody else. He opened up a map in front of Herzl and said, "Look, we've got all this land. Why don't you take this as your state?" And he was actually pointing to Kenya. There was no such thing as a Uganda scheme. He actually got it wrong. I don't know if anybody knew that, but at least you got something out of this class. If you haven't gotten anything else out, you can know that it should have really been called the Kenya scheme and not the Uganda scheme. That's how little Chamberlain had of how much he considered the people of Africa. Thankfully, we did not take him up on his offer, and we're in Israel. Okay. So let's move on and let's discuss our first. We're going to look at 6 different figures in the controversy over Zionism in the religious world. And let's start. We really have to start with Rav Kook. But our question really now is, and this is what in the back of your minds as we're going through the next 6 hours of our class. That's a joke. But as we go through our class here, the question that you should be asking yourself is Zionism consistent with the Torah? Now, I know all of you have preconceived notions about this, because I have to imagine if you came to this class, you probably align yourself as a Zionist, and you probably don't see any inconsistencies between Torah and Zionism, but try to be unbiased here and try to come with an open mind. And we'll see three Zionist rabbis, three Torah scholars that were Zionists, and then we'll see three Torah scholars that were anti-Zionist. And then we'll see where they were coming from. And that's how we can truly appreciate as we go through this series of religious Zionist leaders, because we have to understand what they overcame. So Rav Kook, as we all were familiar with Rav Kook, Rav Kook was the chief rabbi of Mandatory Palestine, and really one of the former. Now he was not the first Zionist rabbi, not by far, not by far was he the first. And as we go through, we'll discuss Rav Kook's philosophy. As we go through, we'll have a class on Rav Kook's philosophy, and then we're going to have classes about religious leaders that differed very strongly from Rav Kook, also Zionist Torah scholars. Those are my favorite to talk about because everybody talks about Rav Kook. I like talking about the other people that people don't know as well and haven't studied as well as Rav Kook. But Rav Kook had a special charisma to him and a special scholarship to him, and he and really captured people's minds to this day. He's a lot more popular than any other religious Zionist rabbi. And he felt that he was a very I will go into it, but he's a more spiritual thinker, I would say, more than a practical thinker. And Rav Kook felt that, as you see this quote here, that really this Zionist movement was part of a redemptive process. It was part of a messianic first steps to a messianic era. This was something you can imagine today. I'm not gonna criticize our generation, but we're probably less desirous of a messianic era than any generation that has come before us. We live very good lives. Like the Jewish people. I'm not talking about the people on the Zoom. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. I'm not judging anyone's personal circumstances. I love my life. I live a very good life. I still want Mashiach to come, but I have to imagine that my grandfather, who was a survivor, wanted Mashiach in a much different way and a greater level of intensity than I do, and wanted and would have appreciated being able to go back to Eretz Yisrael a lot more than I appreciated, as much as I do appreciate it. And so the attraction of hearing that there's a first step towards Zionism, towards the redemptive era, a messianic era, really was attractive to Jews who were living through very tough times of poverty and times of persecution where they could not escape. And that was Rav Kook's real draw to Zionism. He said, look, you're going to want to appreciate Zionism because it's this first step towards Mashiach. And he felt that settling the land of Israel was a mitzvah, right? And again, this promise of God's redemption. So Rav Kook saw Zionism and embraced Zionism and saw it as part and parcel of religion, part and parcel of authentic Torah Judaism, did not see contradiction, and encouraged people to follow religious Zionism. Okay, so I'm not sure if, I don't know what MB stands for, but I'm not sure if they have a question. I'm going to put on mute in case they don't. Okay, so that's Rav Kook. Okay, Rav Kook was very. Now let's get to some people we might not know of as well. So this is Rav Shmuel Mochelver. Okay, and so Chovevei Tzion was one of the first religious Zionist movements. Again, and predates Herzl. So if we have this notion from Rav Kook's timeline, that Rav Kook really came into popularity after Herzl, and maybe you might be mistakenly think that the religious Zionist world really just grabbed onto a movement that already existed, and we're sort of like bandwagon jumpers. Herzl already started Zionism. We'll jump onto that bandwagon, and then we'll claim afterwards that sort of retroactively that it was religious. That's not true. You had many people thinking that now is the time to come back to Eretz Yisrael. Now's the time for a mass movement back, and the Chovevei Tzion movement, which means the cherishing Tzion, was a movement that predated Herzl and really grabbed onto this notion of, hey, we could go back to Eretz Yisrael and we should go back to Eretz Yisrael. Now you can only imagine how revolutionary this idea was to people who had not lived in Eretz Yisrael for 1800 years. Right? For 1800 years, Eretz Yisrael was something that you dreamed about. Eretz Yisrael was something that you prayed about. Eretz Yisrael was something that you spoke about at the Pesach Seder. You know, maybe next year we'll be in Yerushalayim. The end of Yom Kippur, he talked about the end of Yerushalayim, but it was sort of like a legend, a fairy tale of the Jewish people. It wasn't something that people lived nowadays. Nowadays, when El Al's flights aren't so expensive, it's very easy just to get on a plane and go to Eretz Yisrael. Right? That was unheard of. You couldn't just go to Eretz Yisrael. There was no such thing as going to Eretz Yisrael. That was looked upon as dangerous, ludicrous, and almost something like if you would tell your parents today that you want to go to the moon. So you'd be, what do you mean you want to go to the moon? You can't just go to the moon, right? So that's why. So when somebody came and said, "No, we can go to the moon. Let's go to Eretz Yisrael. We can just move." So that was revolutionary. And as Rav Macholver says, he says the revival of our nation. He didn't just see this as an idea of moving to Eretz Yisrael, but rather he saw this as an act of kedusha. This was something that we could now, as a nation, we could reclaim ourselves instead of looking at ourselves as this is an Ashkenazi and this is a Sephardi and this is a German and this is a Polak and this is somebody from Austria and he's Hungarian. We're a nation. We're Am Yisrael. That's how we should view ourselves, as Am Yisrael. And now to say that it's against the idea of Torah and against the idea of what Am Yisrael is for, to go to Eretz Yisrael, that's impossible. How could you say such a thing? Right? What could be more authentic to Am Yisrael than Eretz Yisrael? So when he's going around and he's talking and he's teaching people that, hey, let me plant this idea in your head of maybe it's time to leave this dreary existence that we have here, and it's time to come back to Eretz Yisrael. And they come along and say, that's not really, we're Torah Jews. We're all about Torah. There could be nothing more Torah than Am Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael. And this was a revolutionary way of thinking to be able to do that, to think as a nation as opposed to just in your little bubble of the land that you lived in. Paul, does anybody have questions? Okay. I'm not used to this. Yes.
Before Herzl, what was going on?
This is it.
So before,
Like
when you say what was going on, do you mean in the world or do you mean in the Torah, with Torah scholars?
No, with the Jews, what they're pushing to get to Eretz Israel. Somebody was bringing the idea before.
No.
Anybody was in.
I'm telling you, can you imagine? I just want you to imagine for a minute, okay? I want you to imagine somebody walking in the room right now and trying to sell you on the idea of buying the first homes on Mars. Right? Well, you look at them like they were ludicrous. And if they said to you, no, you don't understand. This is a great thing. And you're going to be the first ones. You'll be the pioneers. You look at them and say, you're a crazy person. That idea is not, yes, maybe, hold on, I don't know, 1,000 years from now, we'll all have colonies on Mars and we'll be living there. I don't know, who knows? I'm not going to see that. In my lifetime, I'll never see such a thing. That's what it was like. If somebody came to you and said it's time to go back to Eretz Yisrael, they would look at you as if you were mad and dangerous, and you were trying to get across dangerous ideas. So when these rabbis came around and started talking about this and writing about this, people looked at them as this is mishagas. Why would you ever even bring this up? For 1,800 years, 1,900 years, we haven't been able to go back to Eretz Yisrael. We don't know what's happening in Eretz Yisrael. We don't know what it looks like. They don't know what's in Eretz Yisrael. They have no idea. For all they know, there could be Romans running around. They have no idea. There's no information out there. This isn't that you could turn on your television and look at the news and see what's going on in Eretz Yisrael. There's nothing going on in Eretz Yisrael. Every once in a while, a schnorr would come around and say, I'm raising money for the Jews in Yerushalayim. Could you give a little? And these people in Europe had no money, so they had nothing to give anyway. So, and then they would say, "What do you mean? There's people in Yerushalayim? Yeah, there's a community in Yerushalayim. We have to support the community in Yerushalayim. They don't have any food." And the people in Europe would say, "We also don't have any food. They sound just like us. That's just they're in Yerushalayim." So it was like a fantasy to think this way. And when these Torah scholars started thinking this way and started pushing this, people looked at them and started ostracizing them because this was, and this is before we get to the Zionist movement. Yeah, we're talking about before Herzl starts going around and talking
I
about his
know.
idea of a movement.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Okay. Anybody else? I'm more in favor of a discussion type class, but okay. Let's see. We'll go on here. Okay, let's look at one more Zionist right now. We're gonna. Oh, I clicked on the wrong one. Sorry, my apologies. Okay, so this nope. I don't know. I guess I got the order wrong. Let's see. I'll try one more time here. Zoom used to have. I have to apologize. Zoom used to have this incredible feature that we don't have it. So I'll just put the last one up. Okay. But there's a Rav named Rav Rainis, and he's without a doubt he is. I'm gonna try one more. Just give me one more shot at this. Let's see if it just downloaded the wrong way. No. Okay, so we don't have it. But there's a Rav named Rav Rainis, and Rav Rainis is my favorite Zionist rabbi. He took a very practical approach. We're gonna have a class about him. He's founded. I'm sure you're aware of the Mizrahi movement. So he founded the Mizrahi organization. So you talk about Mizrahi, some of you might be members of Mizrahi. So Mizrahi is still a very vibrant organization, and he Chovei Tzion not as much, but Mizrahi is a very vibrant organization, and he's founded Mizrahi, and he looked at things very practically. He looked at this and said, "Look, we've got a mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael. We like doing mitzvahs. That's what we stand for. Let's do a mitzvah and let's move back to Eretz Yisrael. Will there be difficulties? Sure. We don't like fasting on Yom Kippur. We do that, right? So there's some things that are harder than others, right? And there's certain mitzvahs that everybody likes eating the Shulchan Aruch at the Seder, right? Eating the meal everybody likes. Going on and on and on. And the Divrei Torah, not everybody's favorite part of the Seder, right? Depends who you are. Depends what you like to do. So when it comes to living back in Eretz Yisrael, will it be a challenge? 100%. But there are mitzvos that the Klal Yisrael, the Jewish people, hadn't done in 1800 years, 1900 years, Shemitah and all these things. Imagine you learn about a mitzvah. It's like to us what Korbanos was, right? Today, everybody's familiar with Shemitah and Trumos and Masos. Even if you don't live in Eretz Yisrael, you have to be careful of these things. You have to look at the labels to make sure that everything's okay. You come to Israel on a trip, and everybody in Israel talks about, oh, you got to make sure this and this and this. You can't just go wherever you want and eat wherever you want, even though it's Israel. So that's the similar type of thing where you had for 1800 years, 1900 years, people looked at this and said, well, this is just stuff that we study about. There's mitzvahs that people have never heard of before, and we have a chance to do those mitzvahs. That we should do, and how can we give up the opportunity to be able to do mitzvahs like that? So that was Rav Rainis' approach. So here you had three rabbis, and this again, there's a myriad amount of examples. These are just some examples of people that we're going to learn about, but rabbis who did not see Zionism contradicting the Torah, but not only did they not see it as contradicting the Torah, they saw it as consistent with the Torah and a way of fulfilling the Torah and being better Torah Jews by involving yourself in Zionism. And they said when the Zionist movement started, they said, "Oh, that's what we're talking. This is what we're talking about. This is going to help us. This is going to thank God, and this is what we need in our lives." And for them, it was probably very surprising because they're trying to get the Torah world to be convinced to come back to Eretz Yisrael. And then all of a sudden, who starts coming around their town to talk about what they see as a Torah idea? Jews who had abandoned the Torah. Imagine if your congregation, and just to give an analogy here, decided to push. I'm not sure if it's frozen here. Okay, no, okay. So imagine if your congregation had this idea: we're going to push Shabbat observance throughout southern Florida. Okay, we're going to push Shabbat observance through Southern Florida. And you say, okay, who's going to help us do this? So say so maybe some of the day schools will help. And then all of a sudden, somebody comes in, a very charismatic speaker, who does not keep Torah mitzvot, and says, "Oh, we should work on Shabbat." You'd say, "Well, I never expected this person to come and help." And that's how these rabbis looked at Herzl. All of a sudden, we're getting help to fulfill the Torah from somebody who looked like to, at face value, had abandoned the Torah. And they looked at this as a divine help and something really that they could really participate in and really help. And this movement would help bring the Jewish people back to Israel. And to some, we focus on a Messianic era, maybe. That was the idea. Good? Okay. Any questions? No. Okay. Let's go on here. So now we'll get to the people that are a little maybe a little different, that looked at this question: are Torah and Zionism consistent philosophies? And looked at it and said, yeah. Now again, remember our definition of Zionism, right? Our definition of Zionism was, right, so the Jewish people have a right to self-determination in the land of Israel. Okay? Jewish people, right? Self-determination in the land of Israel. Is there anybody here that could say that that's inconsistent with something in the Torah? Just those things. Very difficult, right? Very difficult to say that this would be inconsistent with something in the Torah. Yet, we're going to see, and we'll start with our first Torah scholar, the Satmar Rebbe. Okay, Satmar Rav, he's usually known as the Satmar Rav, wrote a Sefer, V'Yoel Moshe, and he adamantly anti-Zionist, right? So now what exactly was his problem? What didn't he like about Zionism? I just challenged you. Tell me something in the definition of Zionism that you didn't like, right? And look what he maintained, okay? And his followers to this day, and he's no longer with us. And this is a tremendous Torah scholar. Okay, this is not so. It's very easy. We see anti-Zionists. We have a sort of inside. We want to go ahead and speak badly about them and say that they weren't good people. I'm not saying that at all. The Satmar Rav is a great person, a great person. So we have to understand his opinion. Why does he think that why did he think that Zionism was a rebellion against God? It seems crazy. We've been talking here for 40 minutes almost about how Zionism is consistent with the Torah, helps us fulfill mitzvos, could even bring Mashiach maybe. And now the Satmar Rav gets up and says Zionism is horrible, it's evil, it's a rebellion against God. How? Right? How's So really what he looked at as you can see in the quote here, so he looked at it, says, you're not allowed to go back to Eretz Yisrael before Mashiach. Right? So you can't do this on your own. Who are you to come along and try to hasten a messianic era by taking over Eretz Yisrael? Now there are Gemaras, and that's what he's referring to, passages in the Talmud, one passage in particular in what's called Masechet Tuvot at the end, where it talks about, at least at face value, it seems, if you just translate the Gemara, it seems that we took an oath as a people not to come back by force to Eretz Yisrael. And the Satmar Rav took that Gemara, took it in a literal way. He did not see it as a figurative message in the way that a lot of the earlier scholars had, and said that it's forbidden for us to go ahead and take over the land of Israel by force. And people coming around and encouraging people to do this are really encouraging people to sin. So when Herzl comes around, or if the rabbis that we saw before, and talked about a Zionist movement that would help people come back to Eretz Yisrael, that was seen as that's not positive. Not positive at all. In fact, you know what's a great analogy to this is our Mars analogy. I haven't spent so much time talking about Mars my entire life, but imagine if somebody walks in here and says, let's all start buying property on Mars. We'll be the pioneers. Some of our first questions, besides how we're going to breathe and what are we going to eat, some of our first questions would be, what does Shabbos look like on Mars? How do I get kosher food on Mars? You're going to open up a kosher supermarket on Mars? How's that going to work? Who's doing shechita on Mars? Right? Let's say something happens to, can you light Shabbos candles? Can I have, can you get tefillin fixed on Mars? All these questions that happens, right? So if somebody comes around and says, don't worry, it's going to be great on Mars. So you'd say, no, those are serious concerns. And you could see rabbis getting up and saying, no, you can't do this. You can't just go to Mars. There's a serious Torah questions about this. And you could see some rabbis getting up and saying that going to Mars would be a rebellion against God because you'd be leaving Torah and mitzvahs. So that's where you could maybe understand the Satmarav by understanding our Mars analogy. But that's the idea of going against God. Now, there's no picture of Shmuel Rosenberg that I could find, but there's a base medrash in Yerushalayim named after him. So that I found the wall. That's this picture. So if you can't see the picture clear enough, don't worry, you're not missing anything. It's just the plaque in his memory that's there. But he felt that the strongest of all the makos, of all the plagues that the Jewish people have faced, and all the persecution, the worst is Zionism. And he felt that it was poison to our faith. Why? I'm asking you. Poison to our faith. Now, again, we all saw the definition of Zionism. And that we said there's nothing in Zionism that's poison to our faith. So where does this come up? Are you raising your hand? And the number 34. I gotta call you that because your hand went up a little. I'm not sure if you're gonna offer a suggestion or not. But no, I guess not. Okay. So this is very troubling to a lot of us. Why is it that Zionism is looked upon as poison? Right? How does that okay. So that's some of the opposition that we have. And let's see. And now here's the Ravenous slide. Okay, we'll save it for our class on Ravenous. Now it pops up, obviously. Okay, but here we have. Okay, wait, we're gonna go with one more person here. Some of the slides are out of order, but we'll have. Okay, so this is Rav Elazar Deutsch. He's a Rav in Hungary, and he says that Zionists have stepped away from Torah of Hashem. Right, Torah Hashem, and the rest of us should be protected by the evil of Zionism. So how are they looking at this? Right, so it's easy for us to cry and scream and say they're wrong and there's no basis for their opinions. But these are very thoughtful scholars. These are people that spent their entire day, night and day, thinking. So our question is, what were they thinking? That's got to be the question that is going through our mind. Yes.
And the last thing in the Passover Seder is next year in Jerusalem. If it
Right.
was okay, how could it be part of the liturgy there?
Correct. Right. 100%. 100%. That's why it's so puzzling. That's not a joke. We don't end our Seder laughing. Yom Kippur also, the last thing we say on Yom Kippur is L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim. And it's something that we pray for in our Shemona Esrei, right? 3 times a day. If you're praying 3 times a day, you're praying Yerushalayim, Yercha Barachamim Tashuv. You're asking to go back to Yerushalayim, to build Yerushalayim, for us to have a message. How could this be, right? 100%. It seems that one of the great themes of the Jewish people, you just read through Tanakh. Right, you read through the Bible, and all you see are talks about Eretz Yisrael. I'm standing here. I always push where I live because I love it so much. I'm standing on the border of Eretz Yisrael right now with Jordan. Right, I'm standing right outside Yericho, outside of Jericho. Right? That's where I'm standing right now. I'm an 8-minute drive from Jericho, where my feet are planted right now. This is where I live. From my shul, right? You're in your shul. From my shul, I can see where the Jewish people came into Eretz Yisrael. When Yeshua came in and the Jordan River split, that I could see that spot from our synagogue. Could there be a greater place and a more consistent place to be for Torah values? Right, that's hard to beat. So how do we understand this? Okay, that's our question. So let's explain, and then we can truly understand the value of Zionism if we understand those that are against it. Now, The original axioms of Zionism is exactly what we spoke about. Okay, those four elements that we talked about. That it's the Jewish people as a people, Am Yisrael, not just as a religion. That we have national rights as a nation. One of them is self-determination, that we get to decide what we're doing. And lastly, in Eretz Yisrael, in the land of Israel. That's the Zionism. But unfortunately, that's not how all Zionism turned out. As we know, by looking at the history of the state of Israel, and as the state of Israel is today, it doesn't only stand for those four principles. It also has a lot of secular activism to it that was true threats to a Torah lifestyle. Now, you might say, when you take into consideration all the good that it did, it was worth it. Okay, I'm not sure how to make that calculation. I'm a big fan of the state of Israel. I'm glad we have it. I'm a citizen. I live here. It's wonderful. But it's you're ignoring the truth if you go ahead and don't recognize that there were threats to a Torah movement and to a Torah lifestyle if you grasped on, especially to early Zionism. We have the luxury today of living in a world where you could be a Zionist and a Torah Jew, and you could succeed. The Knesset, a third of the Knesset observes the Torah. Right, a tenth of the Knesset is Arabs, so take those people out. We're not worried if they keep the Torah or not. Right, so but a good percentage of the Knesset, sometimes it's very difficult to move ahead in Israeli society, and it was almost impossible back in the late 1940s, early 50s and 60s to succeed in the Zionist movement if you kept the Torah. Right, that was very hard. People looked at it as archaic, and the push in the Zionist world, again, obviously not the religious Zionist world, but the push in the Zionist world was more towards a secular life than a Torah life. Very few Zionists doing Daf Yomi back in the day, right? That was not. So when we look at Zionism, we say I'm a Zionist and I keep Torah. There's no contradiction. In my life, I see no contradiction. I'm never faced with a challenge between the two, so there's really no problem. But when these early Zionist leaders came around speaking, when the rabbis looked at them and said, is that really who I want to be pushing as the model for life? The answer was no. But Chaim Weizmann, who was a great man, and not to take anything away from him, was a very religious Jew as a young man, and then moved away from it in order to move up into the Zionist world. Now imagine if Chaim Weizmann comes into your community and he's able to speak Yiddish and he's able to quote psukim and quote Gemaras, and he sounds great, but then you look into him and you see that he's not keeping Torah mitzvos. You can understand a rabbi viewing him as a threat more than as somebody that can assist in our communal needs. So now we understand why rabbis made these incredible comments that to us seem so strange. Zionism is poison, right? The greatest plague on the Jewish people is Zionism. And we're looking at this and saying the greatest thing that happened to the Jews in probably the last 100 years was Zionism. The state of Israel, what an incredible rejuvenation we've experienced as a people. But if you live a certain lifestyle, especially a Hasidic lifestyle, where you're enclosed in a bubble, Zionism is not positive. It takes away from what you are, and you could see why people objected to it. And now we could really understand the value of these rabbis and how they went ahead and were real trailblazers as religious Zionist leaders, and what they were trying to accomplish by, forget about the idea of trying to spread Zionism, but the fight that they had to fight. So when we learn about these leaders in the coming weeks, it's not enough just to know what they said, but we have to recognize the battle that they were facing within the Torah world. And a lot of them lost their families because of this. A lot of them were going to learn about their families because they had very religious families, and saw them as these. They rejected it. And now you can understand. I'm not sure how big it shows up on your screen, but you have these Hasidim that are holding up a sign that says Judaism and Zionism are diametrically opposed. I see these signs and I say to myself, I'm spending my whole life trying to show how they're not diametric, they're very consistent. But now we can understand why somebody who is not exposed to the religious Zionist world doesn't have the same exposure that we have to more of an extended Torah lifestyle could say such a thing and could reach such a conclusion. And now to come along and to fight that battle, we could truly understand the Rav Reinesses and the Rav Cooks and the Rav Soloveitchiks and the Rav Mochovers who started these movements and had to fight this fight. That's my class for today. So I hope I didn't bore you too much. I don't see anybody sleeping, so I'm hoping that's a good sign. So does anybody have any questions or comments that they want to make before we end? I know you have another class coming up, so I'll give you some time. Anybody have anything that they would like to throw in or add in before we end? Yes.
You said that one of the yeshivas in Israel had a plaque to a rabbi who didn't support Zionism. Isn't
Correct.
that a country?
We've got tens of thousands of religious Jews who benefit from the protections of the state of Israel, benefit from the tax shkolim of the state of Israel, and don't believe in the state of Israel. There's a big controversy going on now. I'm not going into politics because that's not what we're doing here today. But you open up the Jerusalem Post, the Times of Israel, you'll see a story that speaks to exactly what we're talking about in our class today. And you'll see it alive and well, just as it was 100 years ago. This is not a controversy that we're learning about in a history class. This is a controversy that exists very strongly today. Okay. Everybody have a great week, and I hope to see you next week.
Thank you, Rabbi Pilichowski. We enjoyed it very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yashikar.